I was right there when it happened. I saw it all. I know it probably feels like everybody in Jerusalem saw what happened, but I witnessed something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. I don't mind the long journey to Jerusalem for Passover. It's nice to travel with my family, but mostly I need the space to prepare myself for the hectic festival season. I prefer the country life. The city is too fast-paced for me, even at the best of times. I like to take our time and arrive a little bit later than everyone else. But there was something different about our journey this year. Throughout the week, there was a constant stream of news coming out of Jerusalem, and it was all about him. People wouldn't stop talking about Jesus of Nazareth. At first, it was excitement about how he rode into Jerusalem down the Mount of Olives on a donkey. People had been shouting and singing for him, calling him the Messiah. But then he was in the temple, throwing around the tables and making a huge mess. He berated the teachers of the law and continued doing miracles against their command. The news kept coming all week. It was either updates about something he had done or guesses about what he was about to do next. Everybody was talking about him. And then Friday happened. That morning, we arrived in Jerusalem, and the sound caught all our attention at once. We couldn't see any people, but we could hear them. It was loud, a lot louder than at other times we've been there. I was cautious, but my two sons that were there with me, they were curious. They pressed me to go and see what it was, and so I told the rest of the family, go on to where we're staying, and I'll take the boys into the city and find out what's happening. We hurried there, and suddenly we were right there in the middle of it all. There were so many people in the streets. Everybody was speaking and shouting at once. I couldn't tell what anyone was saying. I think there were others like us who were just trying to understand what was happening, but most of them were really aggressive. There were people all around us, closing in tighter. I wanted to make sure that my boys stayed close to me, but there was no way of us going too far in this crowd. I was pushing up on my toes, trying to see over the heads of the people, but it was difficult to keep my footing. The shouting was getting so loud, and it started to hurt my ears. It was quickly turning into chaos. I wanted to leave before somebody got hurt, but I couldn't move. The crowd was getting out of control. I grabbed onto my two boys' hands as tight as I could. My fingers were slippery and my feet were sliding in the dirt, but I held on. And then, suddenly, something got all my attention. I could sense that whatever had gathered all these people was now right around the corner from where we were standing. And it was heading straight for us. I watched intently, waiting to see what it was. I could feel my heart beating. I held my breath. I didn't blink. And then I saw who we were there for. It was him. His face was almost unrecognizable from how beaten up he was, but still, there was no mistaking that this was Jesus. He was being escorted by some Roman soldiers through the city streets while carrying a heavy wooden cross on his shoulders. He inched closer to us, and I could see the open wounds from where they had whipped him. He was almost crushed under the enormous wooden beams pressing down on his body. The crowds weren't singing anymore. No one was calling him Messiah. Now these people had nothing but bitterness for him. They hurled insults and they spat at him. They called him a criminal. They wanted to crucify him. I wish I hadn't brought my boys here. Do I let them watch? Should I save them from witnessing this horror? I didn't know what to do, but I was frozen in place. I couldn't stop staring at this man. He was dying right in front of us. We were so close to him now I could almost reach out and touch him. I was hit from the smell of the blood covering his body. It didn't look like he was going to make it much further in the street. But the Roman soldiers were determined to march him on and his giant crucifix out of the city and up to Skull Hill. And then, just as he was about to pass us, he took one more step and his body suddenly gave out. He hit the ground. He was there, right in front of me. Jesus collapsed in the street, pinned under the load of a heavy wooden cross. I didn't know what to do. Someone had to do something. Why wasn't anyone doing anything? Jesus was lying there in the middle of the street, surrounded by an angry crowd, shouting for his death. Who was going to help him? The Roman soldiers weren't in a hurry. Two of them eventually reached down to lift the cross off Jesus' body, while the others tried to contain the crowds. One of the soldiers was struggling to keep back a group of wailing women. But even with all of this action happening around me, my eyes didn't once drift from Jesus. This poor man, he had so many followers from all over the country, but now he was lying in the street, all alone. He was humiliated. He was definitely going to die, I was sure of that. But I couldn't believe how they could shame a person in the final moments of their life. I'm not naive. I know that this is what happens when a person is sentenced to be executed. But I've never seen it up close like this before. It was breaking my heart. I could feel the tears forming just behind my eyes. But I took a deep breath and I tried to push them down again. And then somebody grabbed my arm so tight that it hurt. Without thinking, I let go of my boy's hands and I clenched my fists to defend myself from the attacker. I turned around to find myself face to face with a Roman soldier. I'm so glad I didn't throw any punches. Another soldier then stepped up and grabbed my other arm and they pulled me forward from the crowd. I was frantically trying to say that I'd done nothing wrong. It was the others who were pushing and shouting. I wasn't even part of this crowd. I'd only just arrived in the city. But the soldiers just kept dragging me forward. We were moving closer to Jesus. I thought they were taking me right over to him. But they walked me past Jesus and over to two other soldiers who were waiting for me. Oh no. A rush of dread came over me. I immediately understood what they wanted. There was no refusing, no arguing, no backing out now. This was going to happen. They were going to make me carry Jesus' cross the rest of the way. I couldn't believe this. Why me? Why didn't they choose anyone else in the sea of people? Why did he have to collapse right here in front of me? It didn't matter. The soldiers took their place on either side of me, and now they were lowering the crucifix. It landed hard on my back, and it dug into my spine. It was excruciating. A shot of adrenaline immediately surged through my body, and I took the weight of it on my legs. As I braced myself, I turned my head over to where my boys were standing. I wanted to give them a look, saying, it's going to be okay. But they were staring at Jesus. The soldiers were now picking Jesus up, back off the ground, so he could walk the rest of the way. He slowly got back up on his feet and he turned back towards me. For the first time, we locked eyes. He looked at me deeply. He looked at me like he knew who I was. And even though he was the one clinging to the last inch of his life, he was looking at me with compassion. I will never forget that look. The soldiers gave me a quick shove and told us both, "Move!" I pressed my shoulder up into the intersecting beam and dragged the wooden base along the ground behind me. I took my first step, and then I took another, and another. I was now walking the road of torture behind Jesus, carrying the cross they were going to execute him on. Every time my foot landed back on the ground, I felt the weight overpower my body. The dust of the ground, it was stirring up and I was struggling for air. The sweat from my brow was running into my eyes and stinging them. All I could do now was put my head down and keep on moving forward. I could feel the crowd following behind us, crying out for murder. The women from before were trying to keep up with us. I couldn't see them anymore, but their sobbing and their wailing, it was haunting. In that moment, I felt Jesus' shame and sorrow. And something shifted in me. I knew that this had nothing to do with me. I was just a poor soul who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I had stopped thinking about myself now. This suddenly felt much bigger than me. I was doing this with Jesus. This was our path to walk together. They might have forced me into this position. They probably would have arrested me if I'd disobeyed their orders. But right now, every step forward was my decision. I could do this for him. I could take this cross all the way to the end. I turned my mind inwards, trying to manage the pain and just focus on each next step. I struggled to fill my lungs with air. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it throbbing in my ears. But I kept going. We made it outside the city gates and continued up the hill. I kept going. Eventually the soldier shouted, "That's enough!" They lifted the cross up off my back and I collapsed. My muscles screamed in agony as the circulation slowly returned to each part of my body. I couldn't move. All I could do was lie there in the dirt and try to catch my breath. I don't know how long I lay there before someone came back for me. They rolled me over and they sat me up. I slowly lifted my gaze. I saw the cross again, now standing up on its end, towering over me. And there he was, Jesus. They had nailed him to the cross and left him to hang there until there was no more life left in him. I physically couldn't move from that spot, but also I couldn't leave him now. I sat there all afternoon and I watched him die. I reunited with my sons and we stayed there together in the stillness of that moment, still processing everything that had happened. Right before the end, Jesus cried out to the heavens, asking God to forgive us for what we had done to them. And then he died. There is no doubt in my mind that this was the worst thing I could have been asked to do. And yet, strangely, it was also the most remarkable privilege I will ever experience. I carried the cross so Jesus could be crucified on it. And yet he didn't hold it against me. He was almost grateful that I did it. I encountered a man who had such powerful compassion that he allowed those who hated him to deliver him his death. I got to see Jesus in a way that nobody else did that day. I got to see the journey from his perspective. I understand that he also made a choice. They may have forced him down this path of suffering, but he chose to take every step for something much bigger than himself. That day, he chose to give his life.